Tell us about just the history of geothermal technology, maybe traditionally what it was. I mean, we all know geologic orientation, the hotspots and things like that, but what's today's geothermal look like?
For sure. Many people will have obviously heard about geothermal, right? But when you think geothermal, images that typically come to mind are things like geysers, volcanoes, ring of fire, steam coming out of the ground. That's conventional geothermal. So you'll find that in places like Iceland, sectors of California, Nevada, but that represents such a small portion of the total geothermal resource. It's about 2% of a resource in the US. And so while geothermal is a component of the energy mix, it's a very small component just because it is so limited to those geographies in those geologic structures. And what we're trying to do now in next gen geothermal, you may have heard hot, dry rock geothermal, is
Hmm.
expand that footprint and expand the role of geothermal in the energy sector. We know the heat is underground wherever you go. We know with modern drilling technologies, we can drill to most of these depths. And we know we can create our own reservoirs to access this heat. And so that's what we're trying to do in next gen geothermal and hot dry rock geothermal.
Yeah. So how does that technology, where's that technology come from? I mean, obviously you have an oil and gas background. How does that skill set and what the oil and gas industry has learned and developed and advanced over the years, how is that applying to the next gen geothermal that you're speaking of?
So it's enabling it. And I think this is much of the technology development in oil and gas is what's driving the new technology in next gen geothermal. So if I just step back and look at conventional geothermal. So what is conventional geothermal? It's you have shallow pools of basically naturally occurring hot water. And what conventional geothermal would do is drill two wells into these pools of hot water and pull the water out, harvest the heat, put it back in, and just keep repeating that cycle. But that's why it's so geologically and geographically
It's
limited. There
limited.
aren't
Yeah.
many places you're going to find that shallow pool of just naturally occurring hot water. So using oil and gas technologies, what we're doing in next gen geothermal or hot dry rock geothermal is saying, that heat's down there. Can we find that heat at an economic depth? And we're typically looking for temperatures of about 180 degrees Celsius or greater, um, at a depth typically less than 20,000 feet. So we can use off the shelf technology and get the economics to work. And we're going down to that heat and creating our own reservoirs. So through fracking, you can basically create that reservoir, that lung in the subsurface.
Okay.
We fill it with water. That lung expands. That water is heating up. And then we use the well pressure. So we start to let that lung close on itself and exhale, brings that hot water to surface. We harvest the heat, maintain the pressure in the system, and then re-inject it, allowing it to reheat.
Okay.
So that whole process is really enabled by technology developed in oil and gas, particularly in onshore and conventional plays. And that's what's really helping improve the economics and expand next gen geothermal.
Yeah. So is the premise behind next gen geothermal still a dual well system, an injector and a producer?
It is. And so when you're thinking about next gen geothermal, you'll have two wells. You still have that injector and that producer. Now there are different systems that are currently being developed in this. So one is called closed loop. So in closed loop, you're drilling multiple laterals in the subsurface, two wells right next to each other. And then you're basically connecting them at the toe of the well and you're pumping water down one, letting it naturally heat in that pipe surface area, creating an underground heat exchanger and producing it back to surface. So there's no fracking involved in that. There's a lot of drilling, a lot of steel going into the ground to create that surface area. There's enhanced geothermal, which was developed in the 1970s by the DOE, where they're drilling two wells and they're connecting them in the subsurface via a frac system. And in that case, you're pumping down one, you're going through that frac network and up your producer.
Yeah. So obviously, if we're talking 70s, those would be more conventional, maybe somewhat of a lateral, but not horizontal drilling in the way that we think of it today. Is that
So
horizontal
when it
fracking?
so when it
What?
started, it was vertical. So we go to in the DOE area called Fenton Hill. These were vertical wells joined together in the subsurface. EGS today has now made those into horizontal wells with large unconventional style fracs connecting them. So
Okay.
that's the second technology of next gen geothermal.
Yeah.
And the third technology, which is what Sage is pioneering, is called pressure geothermal. So we're still drilling two wells, but we're not connecting them at in the subsurface. We connect them at the surface. So each well has a near wellbore frac, that lung reservoir analogy, and then we just operate it like a two-cylinder engine. Hot water is coming out of one well. We take the heat, keep the pressure in the system, which increases our net output, and then that water gets injected into the colder well where it reheats, and we repeat that cycle 1 to 2 times per day.
So you're flowing up from one, running it through your plant, injecting the cooled water into the other, and so you're essentially filling each bladder independently, right? If in layman's terms.
That's correct. So each kind of reservoir, each lung has a base volume of water in it that we inject, the pad in kind of frac terms. And then we cycle about 20% of that water. So 80% of the water still stays down there hot.
Okay.
Pulling about 20% out, extracting the heat. We're not bleeding off the pressure, which is a big differentiator. It's why we call it pressure geothermal.
Okay. That makes sense.
And we use that pressure to get the water down the neighboring well, where it mixes with the 80% hot water, which helps in the reheating process.
Okay, that's interesting. So, so it's not in the way you think that historically you would have, to your point, the dual laterals where you frack and you're just depleting the water and it's moving and flowing through those fracks. This is an independent, two independent systems that you're recharging. What you mentioned, 2 times a day.
That that's still being modeled. What we would expect is 1 to 2 times per day that it
Yeah.
will switch like that two-cylinder engine.
Interesting. So you guys are developing and growing this technology, this latest generation of technology, and right now, I presume what you guys have. We've talked about dual systems or a two well type system. How do you scale that type of technology, or how do you guys foresee scaling that? Is it just multiple two well systems, or do you see being able to grow these two well systems into multiples of two? A 4 well or 6 well or an 8 well. Is that something that is in the vision for this, or does it not work that way? How do you grow it?
So it definitely works that way. So that's one of scaling the system is one of the ways you can drive down the cost per kilowatt hour of energy coming out of it. And to get to scale for geothermal power generation, you really want to create those systems that are 150 megawatts, 200 megawatts, and greater, because there you can really get economies of scale. You can get economies of scale in the equipment you're ordering. You can get economies of scale in land use and the amount of space you're needing. So
Mhm.
one of the biggest takeaways from the oil and gas industry, so of course there's the subsurface drilling and completion elements, but on the surface, there's the multi-well pad drill. And that's what you would recreate in the scaled environment for geothermal power generation. So you're not just going to drill 2 wells. You're going to look at multi-well pads. Maybe you're going to put 10 wells on.
Yeah. Okay.
That's going to save you cost because now you can mobilize one rig and walk the rig. You can do offline activities. The footprint of geothermal, you're looking for a 50 megawatt system, probably about 10 to 15 acres at the surface.
Okay.
And in the subsurface, we would kick the wells out and get the separation we need. But
Yeah.
it's that small surface footprint. It's that ability to pad drill, that ability to get economies of scale will allow this to scale up and grow.
Yeah.
But
So you mentioned that kick out. That was kind of leading to my next question is what is your, in oil and gas, we think of spacing. How much can I produce from this well and how much can I produce from a neighboring well without affecting my production for my first well? what does that look like in geothermal? Is it dependent upon the temperature of the rock that you're drilling to? How big of a subsurface area, I guess, would you need if you were going to do a two well system, or even a four, six, or eight, or 10, like you mentioned? What are you anticipating there?
Yeah, so as we start modeling the behaviors, the potential interference or frac rate from one well to the other, I think that's one of the benefits of the pressure geothermal system is what we're doing in our approach is what we call gravity frac. So we're fracking primarily initiating that growth downwards and then out. Um, and that keeps that frac a bit more consolidated near well bores. From a spacing area, you wouldn't anticipate a larger subsurface spacing or footprint than into oil and gas development. We're still trying to get into that exactly what does that spacing look like. We do have a range, but it would look similar or less than that oil and gas realm. Because again, trying to keep that frac near well, it's one of the ways you're improving the efficiency of your system.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense.